Marin County, California. This is the commute to the office for photographer Dewitt Jones. Many of Dewitt's evocative photographs for the National Geographic are housed in a serviceable building just a couple of yards to the right of the beaten path. World of Photography asked to see a few of these shots. The pictures reveal a way of thinking, a way of seeing, and a way of photographing.
These are some photographs that I took on an article on Point Reyes National Seashore that I did for National Geographic Traveler. This is Almir Falls, which is out on the seashore where the falls actually roars right onto the beach and into the ocean. And this is a fairly standard, expositional shot where I'm showing the falls and its surrounding. And it would work fine and probably actually be the one the Geographic would use, but I wanted to get in further, okay? What is the most exciting thing in the shot? Well, the falls is. You move in with a longer lens, you frame out everything except the falls, and in this case, using the speed of your camera, shooting at about 1/8 of a second to give the feeling of falling water and to give it some of the feeling that you had when you were there, of the movement, which was what was fascinating. So taking everything out of the shot that you don't want and using the speed, in this case a slow speed, to give you a sense of the movement that was there. Looking for different angles, I went up on top of the fall, shot back down to the water going into the ocean, and just did some, kind of arty, designy stuff, working it that way. And then I came back down again and shot a shot with a 20mm lens, pushing myself up against the falls. I didn't think that this worked out very well. I was using that half neutral density to try and hold a little bit of the ocean, but I wasn't real happy with it. But I kind of enjoyed the composition, and then later at another place I found this shot of a little stream going into the down on the sand just at sunset. Used the same kind of composition and got, in my opinion, a much better frame. So you're not only going after a shot in one day, you may be remembering compositions and using them again in a totally different setting. Here again, this is an example where I used a neutral density, half neutral density filter on the back to literally light the foreground, to pop the foreground not by lighting it but by darkening the background. Walking down the beach one day, I found a sand dollar that had washed up and broken, and took a real graphic shot of it lying there on the pebbles of the beach. I liked the graphics. That's what I kept in my mind. A little later, another day, another week, working on the same assignment, a small piece of abalone against larger rocks this time, but using the same kind of very simple graphic. It doesn't have to be done on the beach, finding it again, finding some little succulents pushing up through the sand. Here again, it was a compositional element that kept running along through it. Very bold, simple compositions, here with tracks of seagulls, and here where I even got involved in it, probably pushing it a little too far, but what the heck, you're just pushing the limits of a kind of composition until you can't think of anything more to do with it. Obviously, in this assignment, we were going to have the seabirds, and I started out shooting them fairly representationally, using a long lens and shooting around noon, so I had a lot of light and I could stop everything, doing some shots of them taking off where everything was frozen, and using them basically as silhouettes. Working a couple mornings later, starting to get some pretty light now. Same silhouettes, but pretty light. But obviously birds move, so I wanted to pick up that sense of movement. So using slow shutter speeds, I began to work with that in real nice light during the morning, using about a 1/15 of a second here as the birds flew by in early morning. This one, fairly successful. I like this one a great deal. When you do this, you have to shoot a lot because you don't know what you're going to get until you finally get the stuff back, until you get the film back. But here, getting in really nice light to do it. Now, you can't always get in really nice light, but you can do things to make it work. This shot was taken at noon on a terrible, ugly, rather gray day, but a good, heavy blue filter And one, I got some color in it, and two, I got the speed of the film slowed down enough that I was able to shoot at a 15th of a second. Put on a 300mm lens, just kept walking toward these gulls until they finally took off, dropped the tripod down and shot as they took off, and got what is a real nice shot. Not only was I going to have birds, I was going to have people, and people in relationship to water. One of the things you're going to work with there is you're going to work with body language, making sure that foot is just pointed out like that so you get a sense of anticipated movement. Here's an example where I caught a couple walking down the beach in the early morning, now getting nicer light, and just the way his shoulder is worked and the way she's holding his hand, you have a real sense of the two of them, of his optimism, of her being sort of diminutive and in the background. And I really liked that shot. That was kind of a grab shot. What I remembered about this was the quality of light in the morning. And I really liked that. So I came back again a couple weeks later to the same spot and found two fishermen on the beach, surf fishing. And I sat there for I don't know how long, playing with different filters, but really watching for body language. And they sat there doing nothing for a long time. And then at one point, one guy yawned or did something, but the arm back like that is just sort of him greeting the whole day, you know, getting excited about the whole day, and the whole shot worked. And this was, in my opinion, the best frame I got. Obviously, another theme of this article was going to be the surf itself, the sea. And so I did a lot of work with waves in a whole bunch of different ways. Here's long lens, pushing in on the waves, compressing them together, a fast shutter speed, keeping everything sharp. Here's at the other end of the spectrum, the same beach but shot with a 20mm lens. Now getting the relationship between surf and sky, and being out there early morning just as the first light was coming up and the pinks of the dawn were hitting the waves. Another wide-angle lens, this time running down into the foam itself on a very, very rough day on the beach, using the hard light, using a fast shutter speed to stop everything. I don't want it blurred here, and luckily catching the little accent of the gull as it flew down the beach. Putting on a long lens again and anticipating this salmon boat coming up, realizing that it was white and the waves coming in were white, and trying to get in position where I could stack them all up and have the wave break right at the right time, running down the beach, doing this 3 or 4 times till I finally, the boat got too far out and I couldn't hold focus anymore. A 16mm lens, almost bending the horizon, but making the sea now look like a big arm of a clam literally coming out of the ocean. And here was an idea I had one day of watching the waves and wanting to get a sense of motion, of saying, well, what if I shot at a second with a couple of neutral density filters, and I'd put the camera on a tripod and the wave would come in and I'd run down to it and I'd try and get just the last little bit of movement, set the tripod down, go click, you know, and then it would all wash over my feet, and then I'd do it again. But I think a real successful shot in the sense of giving you a mood of the ocean in a still that is more like movies. Another part of this article, and probably one of the most delightful, was working with the animals on Point Reyes. And one evening I was out just after sunset, actually, driving out in the headlands, and out of the car window I saw a fox. And I'd never, ever, before or since, had communication with an animal like I had with this one. And I sort of looked out the window, and he was standing there, and he looked at me and he said, "You got 64 in the camera, don't you?" You know, and I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You want to change it?" And I said, "Sure." And I leaped out of the car and I wrestled in the back and I got 400 and I jammed it in the camera, and he looked at me and said, "You got it in there?" And I said, "Yeah." And I got one shot off and he said, "See ya," and just split, you know. So this was the only shot I had, and it was lousy. And I did the best I could, but I didn't get it. So I came out there about 3 weeks later, and I was going to shoot a moonrise, and I've got my 400 millimeter lens, and I'm hiking up this trail, and Kathy and my dog Isa are behind me, and I looked up, and there's the same fox. And he says, "Hi, I've been waiting for you," you know. And I said, "Far out." And I kept walking closer, and I kept thinking he's going to go at any minute. And I sort of put my head down because there wasn't anywhere to hide. He saw me, and I got as close as I got, and I looked up, and not only hadn't he moved, but he lay down, you know, and he just sat there. And I got about this close and took a whole bunch of pictures with the 400 of him. He had his eyes closed in some and open in others. And I walked a little closer, and he stood up, and he said, "That's as close as you're going to get." And I said, "All right," but he said, "If you don't come any closer, we can work this way." And we worked from this position about a half a mile all the way down the coast as he was hunting that evening. And I was able to work with him and get shots, you know, like this, where the animal, I'm very close, and he's totally involved in what he's doing. It was really delightful. And at one point, Kathy and Isa came up over the hill, and the fox looked at me and goes, "I didn't know you had a dog," you know. And I said, "It's all right, you know, you're not round and you don't bounce." And the fox looked very closely at my dog and said, "You're right, I really don't care," and went back to doing what it was doing. And my favorite of the shots I got was this one, because you had not only lovely light on the fox and a catch light in his eye, but you had the ocean in the background. Clearly this is not in a forest, it's on the seashore, and so it told a lot about a lot of things in one shot. The idea of pushing any situation you like, not just looking at it in one way. I was driving down the highway, I saw all of these mushrooms on a tree, and I really liked what they were and how they were growing. I took this shot with a longish lens, but then, not satisfied with it, I just got out of the car and kept pushing it, eventually got up underneath it, and got what I feel is a much better shot and composition. Here, stopping the lens way down so you get full depth of field all the way from the bottom mushrooms to the top one. Another example of finding a composition early on in shooting this article that I liked, and taking a picture, remembering the place and the composition. And one night I was out in the same area, the light was getting pretty, I couldn't find anything to shoot. I remembered this place, went back to it in very different light and in fact a different season, and got another shot at the same place. So when the light is right, you want to be able to do a lot of things very quickly because it's not going to last. And part of that is knowing places where you could get a composition in a very quick amount of time. Here again, being out in very open light on the end of the peninsula, shooting some pictures, but finding a real nice place that said something about Point Reyes, then coming back again in prettier light to shoot it a second time, and in fact coming back a third time, this time to fly over it and do the same composition. So it's pushing those things because you only have one image, and the image has got to tell a lot. So you're not thinking sequence, you're thinking, if this says something, then I want to go back there and push it as far and as hard as I can. The favorite shots that I took at Point Reyes were all the stuff that I did after the sun went down, and this is using very long exposures, lots of reciprocity failure, but shooting really very much in the abstract now. This is working on the Great Beach with little puddles that were on the beach and letting them move, and the dark band is the beach, which has gone completely dark, and the rest of it is the ocean in the background, working into just pure abstractions here. But I backed up at one point and got my favorite shot, which was this one, where a long exposure where you could see the circles actually move as the water came into that little pool. So that's not only pushing composition, but now it's pushing the whole time of when you can shoot the film down to where you practically can't see anymore, but still working to get the shot.
The state of Utah didn't have to go looking for a spokesperson who appreciated the scenery. He was already out there, getting the shots for National Geographic. How Dewitt Jones wound up on the other side of the camera next.